Our next speaker is Bill Egbe, who is the head of sustainability for the Coca-Cola in 91 countries that make up Coca-Cola Eurasia and Africa. Before that, I understand Bill was the head of Coca-Cola in South Africa. Floor is yours for your intervention.
Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you, Professor, for that kind introduction and for having us join this panel. For us in Coca-Cola, water is very fundamental to our business, and that is reflected in our engagement on so many different fronts in the space of water. It makes a lot of sense for us to be quite concerned about the future of water beyond 2025. It's fundamental for our success in the long term. And that same notion is what drives our view of sustainability. The fact that we understand that for our business to thrive, the communities in which we do business must thrive. For our business to do well, the people who live in the communities in which we do business have to do well. And I think if one looks at the question that was posed to us, that asked us to focus on two areas that we believe should be key focus areas for water professionals in the next 14 years, I think we have to lean back on the things that we know about. As I say, in these kinds of gatherings, we never try to pretend that we're experts on these issues. But the one thing that we know how to do is to lean on the experts and access them and bring them to help us find the solutions. So I would not attempt to run you through a litany of proposed solutions that could be applied to this problem. But I will lean on the things that help us be successful in what we do every day, and that we've been able to transfer to our work on sustainability and achieve some traction by applying some of those principles. And I want to start with the first one, which is around, I think the previous panelists, a couple of previous panelists talked about a culture of responsibility around how we use, manage, and deploy water. And I say closely linked to that, or actually what I would prefer to talk about, is a culture of accountability. It's the notion that for all of us stakeholders that come to the table to discuss these issues, that use water, that help deploy water, is to get the sense of accountability around not just how we use, but also the commitments that we make, how we measure, track, report, and how we try to accelerate towards the commitments that we make. Because the culture of responsibility is easy enough for us to talk about the importance of the things that we need to do around water. The question is that, do we take a sense of accountability around the commitments that we make? Do we define the timeline? These are the things that we do every day in business. It enables us to ensure that we have good alignment on objectives and get focused delivery against those objectives. Principles that work well in the private sector. I wonder whether we cannot apply some of these in the public sector to accelerate the pace of progress in implementing solutions around the challenges we face with water. That means that in the cases where we have extensive regulation, we have legislation that should guide what needs to be done to address the issues in water, are we making sure that tracking, measurement, and reporting is in place to ensure that those who are responsible also get a sense of accountability for delivering the outcomes? Until we generate a sense in these areas that there has to be accountability for delivering against the commitments and for implementing the solutions, it will be very difficult for us to get significant traction. And for that to happen, we not only have to measure and track, as one of the previous panelists talked about, but make sure that also the reporting and the discussions on corrective action happen in a frequency that enables us to maintain the pressure and focus on dealing with this problem in an aggressive manner. So the culture of accountability should go with that culture of responsibility. I also know that Professor Biswas asked us to be provocative. But being a corporate man, I can only be so provocative. But I think I'll venture a little bit, if he allows me. And it comes to the second area of focus that I think has to be put on the table. And I think two previous panelists have mentioned that. It's about the issue of pricing of water, realistic pricing of water. And it's easy for us in the private sector to put this issue on the table because those in the public sector more often have to deal with the immediate and direct consequences of debates on this subject, because it's never a popular discussion to talk about trying to apply more realistic pricing to something that most populations across the world see as fundamental necessity and a basic right. But the reality is that if you ask us to talk about what would be the game changer in the future, we know that the private sector thrives on the fact that we're able to find solutions to needs based on the understanding that we're going to have an economic value proposition that justifies the effort required to find solutions, bring together partners, bring together resources to deliver these solutions. And I think the same has to apply to water. It doesn't take away from the fact that we do understand we have an obligation, because realistic pricing goes along with water rights, that this is a basic commodity, and there are hundreds of millions of people around the world for whom this is a fundamental element of their survival. And we're not talking about being able to expand profitability of delivering water. It's about making sure that you have a realistic pricing that enables you to accelerate the investments and enable you to have more realistic use of water, manage demand based on realistic costing. But we're also pragmatic, and we know that everywhere across the world, when the public sector talks about removing subsidies, it's a very heated discussion, very strong reactions, but we have to have the courage to do the things that we know would accelerate progress in this area and fight the battles. In Africa today, we see it, with many African countries finally realizing that their level of subsidies around fuel are a drag on their economic development, a drag on growth in this country, and unsustainable. And if we want to have sustainable answers around dealing with the issue of water, we may need to consider what realistic pricing of water means. In the private sector, we've learned to do something that we call segmented pricing. And the public sector talks about having tax systems that reflect the different socioeconomic levels' ability to pay. And I think we need to explore solutions that enable us to offer more affordable water pricing to those who need it, and ensure that those who can afford to pay higher prices do pay higher prices for access to water. This will enable us to have a more realistic view on the importance of managing demand and ensuring that we can minimize waste, but also enables us to do two other key things. One is accelerate investments. We know that if we cannot get accelerated investment in innovation and research, it will be very difficult for us to deal with the pressures that we face on so many multiple fronts on the issue of water. The challenge that a couple of the panelists who spoke before me talked about around solutions around energy efficient desalination of water, for example, one has to believe that with the pace of innovation in many other sectors, if that kind of pace of innovation could be transferred into an area like research around water solutions and creating more energy efficient solutions around desalination, that we should be able to tackle one of the most obvious solutions to most of the challenges that we face, which is to be able to tap into huge amounts of salt water available globally. But linked to this question of accelerated investment is the question of how do we ensure that there is more integration in the solutions that we try to implement. And the research also has to look at the problem in a comprehensive manner. We talked about comprehensive interventions. In most of the communities that face challenges with water-related issues, maybe access, sanitation, or hygiene, we do know that the most effective and sustainable solutions are ones that are integrated and comprehensive, that do not only look at access, sanitation, and hygiene, but also looked at conservation issues, protecting the watershed areas, ensuring that we can optimize the utilization of the water that we have, and minimizing wastewater. So we do understand that comprehensive integrated solutions are the most sustainable solutions. The question is, how do we accelerate the kinds of investments to find solutions that give us an integrated answer into the challenge that we face in this area? Linked to this question of accelerated investment is also the ability to replicate solutions that work very rapidly and to do that on a collaborative basis. It's about avoiding the tendency for different groups and entities, different partnerships to work on independent solutions and try to figure out how we connect all of these initiatives that are headed towards the same goal. How do we drive more collaboration so we can get scale faster and expand replication more aggressively? The second element that I would like to put on the table, again, in line with the thinking about let's be provocative, is to challenge the paradigm around water as a commodity. Some panelists said earlier that this debate between is water a commodity or a strategic resource. But maybe the paradigm should be that it is both. It is a commodity for some folks, it is a necessity, but also has to be managed as a strategic resource. When we look at the solution sets that we propose, are we able to propose solution sets that deal with water both as a commodity, as a basic necessity, but also as a strategic resource that requires foresight in how we invest to support development in this area? Those are paradoxes that have to be managed. And I believe in the next 14 or 15 years, if we project ourselves forward and we start focusing on solutions that say these are not either-or answers that we're going to look for, we're going to find solutions that enable us to do both elements, which means be able to have differentiated pricing for water where it makes sense, but also be able to manage water as a commodity as a strategic resource. Our ability to address water with these paradoxes in mind is what is going to enable us to accelerate our ability to find meaningful solutions for the long term. If you look at companies like Coca-Cola, we have learned that partnerships are fundamental in being able to participate in the dialogue and to contribute towards finding solutions. We have to ask ourselves the questions: are we doing enough to create connections between the existing groupings of partnerships that exist to deal with the water issue? It's very common in the private sector that we all want to run and own our own initiatives and put our labels on them. The question is there an opportunity for us to network these partnerships and accelerate the pace of transfer of learnings and solutions more aggressively, and collectively be able to scale up solutions much more rapidly? These are questions that we have to pose to ourselves and commit ourselves to be able to make more of an effort to make progress in these areas. In the continent I come from, although we're very pleased with the fact that it was announced last week that we've made good progress around the Millennium Development Goals for access to safe drinking water, that they officially met. We still understand that as you dig into those results, we realize that access to water may have been addressed, but there are huge issues around sanitation and hygiene that still need to be addressed. And that in sub-Saharan Africa, we still have huge problems around access to safe water. The questions we have to ask ourselves, as we set these commitments and we do the good job that we've done to make such good progress over the last 5 to 10 years, do we continue to maintain the commitment to say we're going to look a little bit deeper under these targets to ensure that we don't try to achieve these goals holistically at a high level, but we keep an eye on those pockets where we still have a long way to go? In sub-Saharan Africa, we still have safe water access issues, and we need to ensure that the partnerships that exist that have driven a lot of progress in this area over the last decade continue to flourish and continue to get investment to accelerate the pace of providing access to safe water to the millions, tens of millions of Africans who still need access to safe water. We rely on our great partnerships, be it our partnership with the UN organizations, UNEP, UN Habitat, the WWF, our partners like GTF, who help us to find solutions to contribute to these initiatives. And we hope that as this debate accelerates, we will maintain a focus on ensuring that the details underneath the achievements that have been made so far are not overlooked, and that will continue to drive for 100% access to safe water. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen.